Is there a list of banned
Senator
apps?
Senator Roberts, you have
Thank you, Chair. Just a few points of questions for clarification, Mr. Pizzullo. I'll read from your website. Home Affairs brings together migration, cyber and infrastructure security, national security and resilience, and border-related functions working together to keep Australia safe.
Yes.
Now, you've been credited, and justifiably, I'd say, with the success in keeping our borders or closing our borders after your appointment in 2014 and the immigration. You've also been the inaugural and only Secretary of the Department of Home Affairs, which is seen as crucial in that role. That correct?
No,
I didn't mean about the praise. I meant about the roles.
I've occupied the office for the time period that you've spoken
Thank
about.
you. Thank you.
As to whether I've achieved any success in the role, it's perhaps...
Well, you've been widely credited with a lot of success, so we appreciate that.
That's for others to determine.
Do you
I've certainly been the occupant of two secretaryships over a decade, yes.
Yeah, and key in security. Do you consider that elected representatives who challenge government policy are domestic terrorists?
Well, I'll just go back to my earlier evidence. Terrorism's got a particular definition under our criminal code, under the ASIO heads of security power that are set out in the ASIO Act. If any person, elected or otherwise, is acting in contravention of the criminal law and acting as terrorists, then of course they are subject, of course, to a judicial process finding them so. But your question relates to elected members. I think you said challenging government policy.
Yes.
All other things being equal, that's just called democracy. That's not called terrorism. No.
Thank you. So do you consider it legitimate to deliberately or inadvertently censor elected senators who are duly elected representatives of the people if their social media statements differ from government policy?
Well, I took on notice both at a general aggregated level from Senator Antich and then from you specifically in relation to your own personal circumstances, whether we had, and I think you might be going to COVID here, but I just want to be clear about what you're asking about. But I took earlier on notice that we would look at the COVID-related referrals, the so-called takedown referrals, 4,000 and some other number associated, and just check that there were no members of the House nor members of the Senate included in that list. So if the answer is no, like zero, then the question in a sense becomes void because we haven't done anything. If, frankly, regrettably, if we've accidentally, without identifying a person's name, I don't know if you self-identify as a government senator, but if we've taken a view of Malcolm Roberts... Not
as a government senator, but as a senator.
Sorry, a member of the Senate, I should say. I do apologise. If we've
got some standards.
If we've inadvertently, and it would be inadvertent, made a referral of a sitting member or a senator, then I would find that regrettable because, in a sense, you're held to account by your peers and by your electors. It's not my job to hold you to account. Now, there is a grey area. If you, whether you're a senator or otherwise, were, and I couldn't for a moment imagine that you would do this, Senator, or any other senator would do it, inadvertently disseminating terrorist or violent extremism material, then, notwithstanding the privilege of a senator, my staff would take the view there's a referral here. But on matters of COVID, which were related to a public health emergency that was catalysed as a direction to us about 3 years ago by the then Morrison government, if one of your tweets or one of your postings has been inadvertently swept up in our referral process, we'll get to the bottom of that on notice and get back to you through the notice process.
Right, so I'm assured that if I was a terrorist or engaging in terrorist activities or promoting terrorism, you would treat me as no different from a terrorist.
Your status as a senator in those circumstances would
That's
provide
very reassuring.
no protection at all.
Thank you. It's also reassuring that if you inadvertently cause me to be censored in any way, that you would also protect my rights to free speech.
Well, I'm distinguishing here between the service that we were providing in support of the Health Department on a public health emergency, which is really not about terrorism, it is about public health advisories. Then I would, and I'll examine the data when Ms Hawkins and her people assemble it for me, I would take the view that we should not be doing referrals of sitting members or senators on public health issues. terrorism, acts of incitement to violence, then we are in an area where the privilege that you have as a senator might well be thwarted by the criminal law, let's say. But I can't imagine that circumstance would arise in relation to COVID.
I'm reassured because privileges do come with responsibility, so I'm reassured by what you're saying.
Thank you.
Do you not believe that Australian people have the same right to freedom of expression as I have?
Well, I thought I'd answered this before, but let's just recap. There is no, even on the internet, which is considered to be untrammelled and unfiltered and uncensored, there is no accepted absolute freedom of expression because you've got laws that relate to things like, for instance, you cannot stream the abhorrent abuse of a child.
Accepted.
Now, but once you accept that there is some constraint at the outer edges, self-evident cases of child abuse, a terrorist live streaming of an abhorrent act.
But questioning government policy, that's
no,
okay.
I was going to get to that, Senator, but then you start to get into distinctions and lines of definition. We're not arguing the principle anymore about censorship because even the internet, which is thought to be this untrammelled utopian public square of enlightened discourse and conversation, it's been many years, if not several decades, since that view went out the window because there have been both laws, there are treaties, there are international understandings that say no, there is certain content that is so vile, that is so unacceptable that it will be taken down by those providers who are responsibly acting. Now, you can't get to every app and every dark website and every provider, particularly on the dark web, and they do peddle abhorrent material, so you're not going to regulate that well. You've just got to go hunting and take out other actions in relation to, if you like, what's under the clear web.
So I understand that there's a lot of grey area there, but what you're saying is I have the right to speak, but everyday Australians do not on COVID matters.
I'm struggling to understand how you've jumped to that conclusion.
Okay. Well, let's go two more points of clarification. In Australia, in 2022, we've had more than 30,000 excess deaths. That's the equivalent of 2 Dreamliners crashing with total fatalities every week. Would you inquire into the crashing of 2 Dreamliner aircraft every week for 52 weeks?
Well, my remit in that instance would be related to terrorist or related acts of violence or sabotage that cause those aircraft to go down. So, of course, I would get involved. And I know it's a hypothetical question that you're putting to me, but as a matter of principle, that would fall under our remit of aviation security as well as counter-terrorism. If you're asking me by way of analogy, some kind of quantitative analogy to say this many people died who otherwise would not have died because of the advent of, I think, COVID vaccinations or you used the term injection, I really would urge you to direct that question to the Secretary of Health and his officers because it's not my responsibility to give you advice or evidence on public health issues.
No, I accept that. What I'm getting at is, would it be part of your remit to at least question what was going on with 30,000 deaths? That's more than 10 times.
Sorry, 30,000 deaths in relation to COVID or airline crashes?
COVID injections.
That's an assertion from you, Senator Roberts.
So that's 10 times the level of deaths from the Twin Towers World Trade Organisation collapse.
If there's a question of an abnormal rate of premature death, that is to say death beyond normal morbidity statistics, and I don't know what the science is, I don't know what the evidence is, I don't know what data you're pointing to.
Would it raise questions in your mind?
Well, it might raise questions for the Secretary of Health, so okay. I guess I'm suggesting that that's appropriately directed to him.
Okay. Oh, he'll be getting it. So I take my responsibility to serve the people because they pay my salary. Taxpayers pay your salary as a public servant. Just a final point of clarification. Do you work for the government or for the taxpayers?
Well, I'm a public servant employed under the Public Service Act, so ultimately I work for the public. In fact, as a matter of law, I'm required to be impartial, I'm required to be apolitical, I'm required to serve responsively the government of the day, because that's in law, but also in a way that is apolitical. So, for instance, if issues arise as to the records of former governments or issues arise in relation to the observation of the caretaker conventions, I would stand my ground and make, potentially provide difficult advice or decisions to the government of the day. So generally speaking, by law we are required to be responsive to the government of the day. That's in the Public Service Act. On those rare occasions, and it doesn't happen in my experience very frequently, where the government of the day might do something inadvertently, typically that relates, for instance, to the records of decisions of previous governments, that might relate to the application of the caretaker conventions. I've got a duty not simply to say, well, I work for you, so I'll just do whatever you say, to say, hang on, that is either unlawful or it's contrary to Westminster conventions.
Thank you. So, final question. Would you fully cooperate with the Royal Commission, which Mr Albanese promised before he was elected, if it was tasked with examining these takedown notices around COVID?
I would cooperate with any commission of inquiry, royal or otherwise, commissioned by the government and instituted pursuant to letters patent. It wouldn't matter what the topic is, of course. We would always engage dutifully and conscientiously with any commission of inquiry.
Thank you very much, Mr Pizzullo. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Senator Patterson, you have the call.
Thank you, Chair.